What a peculiar place to have a party.
Welcome to the Tea Party, the Hatmakers podcast where we connect with hatters from around the world. Talk hats and hat making to build the community and share tips and tricks to take your hat making to the next level. Wow. So sit back, pour yourself a brew and settle in because here comes the show. On this episode of the Hatmakers podcast, we're chatting with Darryll from Hatblocks Australia. A second-generation hat block maker based in the Adelaide Hills of South Australia. Darryll makes and supplies handcrafted timber hat blocks to hatters and milliners from around the world. Working with a selection of high-grade timber and simple hand and power tools, Darryll makes the shapes and forms that enable hatters like you and me to create our art. Listen on to hear more about this lost trade and one of the unsung heroes of the hat making industry. Without further ado, here's Darryll. All right, I think that's it. All right, Darryll, thanks for coming on the show, mate.
Pleasure.
Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Yes, I'm God. No, I can't help myself, can I? Look, I'm Darryll. Just a hat block maker. Literally fell into the trade, into the industry about 2011, I think. 2011. And I've been learning ever since.
Sounds great. So what's the name of your company?
We call ourselves Hatblocks Australia. It used to be Blocks by Design, which was the name that my father Doug gave it when he started it back in about 1999, 2000. He started it in his retirement. He started it to make a hat block for his partner who was doing a millinery course. And back then that was just before the internet was really taking off. Hat blocks were still ordered by catalogue, and you couldn't find hat blocks. I don't even think eBay and all that was really run. Well, it wasn't running when Dad started, so maybe it was even slightly earlier. So you couldn't get hat blocks. So milliners, unless they were lucky enough to have a grandmother that handed down hat blocks who was a milliner, they couldn't find them. So she came home from class one day and she said, do you think you could make me a hat block? And he says, well, I don't know. I'll have a go. Cause he was a drafting engineer by trade, but a chiropractor in most of his life. So he made a hat block. She took it to class. Everyone went, where'd you get that? She said, oh, Doug made it. And, then they said, can you make me one? So, okay, I'll make one. And it literally started like that, word of mouth. So he called it Blocks by Design, and it grew and grew and grew to the point where he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep up with it anymore. And he kept on asking me if I was interested, and I didn't even hear it because I was too busy doing car restoration. And it wasn't until one day I was looking at the work I had left in my workshop as far as customers' cars, and I thought, I've only got 3 months worth of work left and there's no new jobs coming in. So I thought, what am I going to do here? And he rang me and he said, when are you going to take over this business? And I went, what? Can you make money from that? Because I'd always seen it as just some crazy little hobby he had. So I went over and I did 2 weeks intense work with him, came back, walked into woodwork supply store, bought a whole heap of machinery, set up my workshop and went for it.
Wow. Had you worked with timber before?
Only in high school. But I do have a creative bent to me. I've always been artistic, always used to draw, used to do oil paintings, sculpture, stuff like that. So this falls naturally into thinking three dimensionally. Like I will look at a two dimensional drawing or a square block of wood, and I will picture it three dimensionally in my head, which is what you have to do when you're sculpting and stuff like that. So yeah, it was kind of a natural fit, but I didn't ever think, can I do it? I just did it.
Just did it.
I just
And how long ago was that? What year did you start
that'd be about,
producing hat blocks?
I think about 2011. I started. Dad used to get the orders, and he'd send them to me, and I'd make some, and then I'd send them to him, and he'd make sure that I did good enough job. And then after a while, he said, "You don't need to keep doing that. You know, it's okay. You're doing all right, good enough. Send them to the customer." And then about 6 months later, he said, "Oh, look," he said, "I don't think you take over the whole thing." So I did.
Wow. And how was that transition going from working with cars to making hat blocks?
It was a bit tricky at first because I had one customer's car left at the same time as I was making hat blocks. But I slowly just transitioned out of one into the other, and eventually rang the guy with the car to say, "Listen, you're going to have to come and get it because I'm not going to get to finish it." I said, "I haven't touched it for 6 months. Don't have the time. Come take it away." So he came, took it away, and I was going flat out full time making the hat blocks.
And with the hat blocks, were you initially making like millinery style hat blocks for lady hatters or hat makers or milliners? And then, or was there an equal amount of hatters?
Only milliners. Only milliners. There was at that point the word hat maker, as far as we understand it now, talking about the fedora style open crown brim type things, never was even in vocabulary. It was all millinery. We used to do millinery conventions every year, and in those days it was a lot about shape, because at that point, back when my dad started, there were no block makers. I believe the last one, because they all disappeared. Once people stopped wearing hats, um, both men wearing hats and ladies millinery disappeared through the 60s and 70s, 80s, 90s. But by the end of the 90s, millinery was making a comeback because of the horse racing industry. Fashions on the field started becoming a thing, and then they wanted the shapes to go on the head to make all the crazy shapes that they used to wear to the millinery competitions. So at that point, millinery was having a rebirth. I think the only surviving block maker at the time was quite possibly Boon and Lane in Luton in the UK. Well, I do believe that they might have semi shut down for a few years and then got resurrected um, in the late 90s. And so it was shape oriented. So my dad came to me one day when we were preparing for a hat block convention, and he said, "Listen," he says, "I want you to make 40 new shapes." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I did. So I just invented 40 different shape things to put on the head. And we took him to the show, and they sold like hotcakes, and people were saying, "How do I block this?" And I went, "I wouldn't have a clue." I said, I said, "My job is to make the shape. Your job is to figure out how to use it." And by God, they did. There were some clever ladies out there, and they would work out how to make them, and they would win the fashions on the field competitions, um, and word of mouth just grew it, and it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew, and for a long time, it was pure millinery driven. And then probably about 5 years ago, I got my first request for an open crown, and I didn't even know what it was because that's it was so focused on millinery, and milliners didn't really use an open crown. The closest they had to an open crown was what was called a dome or a full dome, which was just literally completely domed all the way around. And that was very often they would make dozens of different things off of that shape. That was just more the curvature and the shape that was the thing. So I got this guy sent me a photograph of this block called a 52, and he said, can you make one of these? And I said, of course I can. And then I looked at it and I went, I don't know how, but I will. Because that's the thing, I've never said I can't make something. So I looked at it and got measurements and blew up the photograph and drew schematics and sent them backwards and forwards until he said, yeah, that looks, pretty spot on. And I made that and sent it away. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of one.
That was the beginning.
That was the beginning. And then there was nothing for ages after that. And then just slowly it started taking off, and I had to do fast learning. What are these 52 and 51s and all these different terminologies and flanges and stuff like that, because the milliners used to call them donut blocks.
Right.
So,
could I ask you to explain the difference between millinery and hat making? Because I know a lot of hatters use the term interchangeably, but it's there's something definite about each of those terms, right?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, some would probably disagree, but a milliner will very often call themselves a hat maker, but a hat maker will very seldom call themselves a milliner. A lot of milliners will cross over into hat making, and a lot of milliners have transitioned into hat making. But the materials are different that they would make hats from. The hat bodies are different to what a millinery capelline is different to a Western weight hat body in its shape and its properties. The milliners will use a lot of softer fabrics, cinemaze and buckram and different cloth. Very often the techniques of blocking are different, and the way of assembling a hat with a brim is different. The skills are transferable to a point. Blake started in millinery. I think I first met Blake when he was doing a TAFE course on millinery, and he transitioned into hats as he progressed. He probably felt or found that wasn't the direction he wanted to go. And I would say a lot of his skills possibly transitioned over. I mean, if you learn how to sew well in millinery, you'll sew well in hat making.
Would you say that millinery is more, excuse me, more like racewear and ladies' hats, and hat making is more of like a man's hat or a fedora, like a unisex fedora or wide brim cowboy style?
Yeah. Millinery for us as a block maker would be divided up into racewear and hats, I suppose, but ladies' hats. Big brims, like it'd go through a fashion. It'd be like big brims are in this season, sort of thing. So but the crown shapes would be pretty basic, and there'd be big swoopy brims, and then it would go. The trend would turn to boaters, and it would be straw boaters, or it would be headbands. So millinery has always been focused on racewear weddings, special occasions, fashion, and stuff like that, which is why it took such a hit in all the shutdowns over COVID, because there was no horse races, there was no weddings, there was no social functions. So people weren't buying, customers weren't coming to milliners saying, "Hey, I'm going to the races. I want something new to wear." Because so a lot of milliners suffered greatly through that period. But the blocks are very different too. Um, um, Whereas milliners will tend to choose blocks that have already got the shape, whereas hat makers, as we know them today, will 90% of the time go for an open crown because they can make the shape. They can turn it into a cowboy hat or into a fedora or a pork pie or whatever it is that they want to do. Whereas milliners are very often trained that the shape is what the block is. So if they want a pork pie hat, they will buy a block that's got it pre-shaped, or a fedora that's got it pre-shaped, or a cowboy hat that's got the pre-shaped into it. Most of the time, not always.
Yep. And do you find that there's a big difference in your customer base? Like, is it definitely one-sided whether you have more milliners or more hat makers?
During COVID and coming out of COVID, well, before then it was like 100% milliners, and then it was 90% milliners, 10% hatters, and then it was 50-50. Then through COVID and just after COVID, it was practically 95% hatters and 5% milliners. And milliners have only started coming back in probably the last 6 to 8 months, from my perspective, to possibly 40% at the moment. Maybe less. It's a bit hard to say because some weeks it's like, oh, I'm making a whole lot of millinery stuff this week, and then it might be 2 months of doing nothing but open crowns and flanges and stuff.
Yeah. And do you have a preference of which one that you like to make?
Probably hatters stuff.
Why is that?
You can production line. I mean, one of the things I love is when the week's work is whole runs or a whole run of open crowns or flanges and things like that, because you can just production line the whole thing. And weeks like that, I can generally get to the end of the week going, oh, wow, it's middle of the morning on Friday and I've got everything done. I've made my quota, because everything works by a dollar value as a business, what I can make in a week. So it's like a lot of things in business. You got some products that don't take long to make, but you can ask a reasonable amount for, versus products that take 10 times as long, but you can't ask 10 times as much for it. So you've got that balance. So the open crowns, for example, are one of those things where we've just been able to work out from a business point of view the sweet spot as far as pricing and what I can actually physically do in a week to get to the end of the week and saying it's all done. I haven't had to rush like crazy and I'm not behind. But when you get a lot of millinery stuff, because it's one only, instead of making, say, 10, each one is a setup. Like if you're making a whole run, you can set your cutters and your saws and up, and you can drill the holes in the bottom one after the other, bang, 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 pump them through. When it's millinery blocks and they're one at a time, it's a setup for every single thing. It's like, where's the templates, where's the patterns, where's the schematics, go and find that, measurements, check, and then it's liaising with the customer because it might be a custom job, and then you've got a question and they're on the other side of the world. So So those things can take longer than you can justifiably ask for cost-wise. So you can get to the end of the week saying, I haven't got everything done. But at the same time, some of those things are really cool jobs. You get sent some really crazy designs, and it's like, how am I going to make this? And it's a great sense of achievement when you've been working from drawings from somebody on the other side of the world to making something real and getting it there and have them love the product. So they're both good. They both have their challenges, but I really do like seeing large runs of Hatmaker stuff come through.
Good to feel like you've accomplished something and to see some money in the bank account for the time you've put in.
Yeah.
It's kind of like custom hats. Sometimes you get those really weird requests that take a lot longer to find the pieces or put together, and then you get some other requests that are a lot easier. Nice little ribbon and a feather, and you're done.
Yeah. I mean, I have some blocks that I should be charging $1,200 for a block, but it's just no way someone's going to pay that. So you can't ask it, but you want to have, if you've got a week where you got one of those in it, you want to have a whole bunch of really easy stuff in the same week.
Yeah. So you were saying that the first hat block that you made for actual hatters, a number 52 or a 51, you made that from just photos and little dimensions. How did you go scaling that for the different sizes?
By the time I was getting to scaling, I'd been getting a few more requests for them. And that's when hat making really grabbed my attention. And at that point, I started hunting around on eBay and buying some vintage crowns and flanges. And I also was lucky enough to have Blake loan me quite a lot of his blocks that he bought while he was in America, which was really, really handy. So I could make some really good reproductions based on them. So from there, it was just, for me, it was using logic. Like if somebody wanted a 57 and and then they also wanted a 58, well, you've got your oval template. So your circumference is not an issue, as long as your tape is measuring around there and you've got the right measurement. But so by scaling, do you mean like heights?
Yeah, because I guess when you say you get a 55 centimeter block, the height of it is very different to a 64 centimeter block.
Yes.
But the perspective is the same.
Yes. I made a run a couple of weeks ago where the smallest was 54 and the biggest was 65. The biggest I've made is 67 too, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 67. And the smallest was an open crown I made, which was 40 centimeters. I think it was for an infant.
Is that right?
Yeah.
We're just about to have a baby, and everyone keeps asking if I'll make baby-sized hats.
Yeah,
I might have to hit you up for one of those.
I've got templates for babies' heads and all sorts of things. made hats for babies. Well, when you think about it, the difference in width between if you're going up centimeter by centimeter is approximately not exact, because the thickness of a pen can even change it, but approximately 1 to 1.5 millimeters all the way around. So that's the only difference between in a whole centimeter is a millimeter or millimeter and a half all the way around the outside of the block is another size. So if you've just gone out 1.5 millimeters, then logically the whole surface of it has to grow by the same. So if you were to get a 1.5 millimeter felt and block it over a 57 and then run your tape around it, it will be likely to be closer to 58. So but that felt thickness is the same all over. So my reckoning was that if a 57 grows by 1.5 millimeters to become a 58, it must also grow 1.5 millimeters in height. And then a 59, another 1.5 millimeters, and so on. So that's how I worked out my scale. And some hat makers agree with that, and some hat makers insist on that by request. Others disagree, and they say no. If I'm ordering a crown run at 57 centimeter at say 5.5 inches high, I want them all 5.5 inches high, whether or not they're a 55 or a 65. So there is a little bit of disagreement there, and if that's what they want, I'll make it. It's not a problem, as long as they understand that they won't make the same hat.
The dimensions will be different. Yeah, it will look different.
Yes. And then you get onto very tricky stuff with your hat ovals, because you've got a normal oval, you've got wide oval, and you've got long oval. But in between them, you've actually got about 20 different ovals, and then you've got egg ovals as well. So I've like a regular oval is a 36 ratio, and a long oval I think is 47. I've got this whole schematics and charts to do with the perfect measurements to have the perfect oval, because they're not an ellipse. So it gets quite in depth.
Yeah, to get behind the design of hat blocks, I find it pretty interesting. It must have been a bit of a learning curve for you to go from cars to making hat blocks, and then to understanding all about hat shapes and sizes and dimensions.
Oh yeah. I mean, cars, you had to be very, very pedantic and fussy when you were doing body work, getting your lines right. And I see the block making a little bit the same, because you're shaping the same. If you cover a car body in body filler, and then you have to shape it back off to perfect the panel, it's no different working with timber. In my experience, it's still shaving and shaping and filing, rasping, whatever it is, sanding until you get the right contour. But yeah, it's you've got schematics for everything. You've got templates, you've got measurements, and there are things that you're measuring 100 times while you're making it.
So you're using basically hand tools and power tools. You're not using CNC cutters or anything like that.
No, all either by hand or by power tool.
Wow.
No CNC.
Have you thought about moving to that, or?
I have. I did go down that journey 5, 6, 7 years ago. I actually commissioned a machine. I got put onto someone that made me a lot of promises of what they could deliver us for a certain amount of money and what its capabilities could be. And they just never delivered, and it took me years to get my money back. And occasionally I think about it for certain jobs, that it's just repetitious, where you want it to be exactly the same every single time. But that's not the way it went, and I debate whether or not, and that would have been a 5-axis machine. So that would literally have taken a blank cube of timber and milled the whole thing in 3-dimensionally. But they're extraordinarily expensive machines. You can get machines that will do 2-dimension. They'll do the top, and they go up and down and left and right and backwards and forwards, but they have a limitation of depth. They can't go very far, so they got to be a much bigger, much more expensive machine to do a whole hat block. And to be quite frank, they can't do it as fast as I can do it by hand. So, the machine could be tied up for half a day doing one hat block. Yeah.
I've noticed in the last couple of years these 3D printed hat blocks have come about, and I got one just to test it out.
Yeah.
But I've predominantly got timber blocks, and they're all from you. I know that I prefer the timber blocks myself, but what are your thoughts of these 3D printed blocks?
I have never seen one. I know of them. I've seen them on Etsy and stuff like that, and I know there is somebody that somewhere sells the program for people to be able to 3D print these things at home as well. I don't know. I think being plastic, they may have a problem with heat, but I don't know. I know 3D printing takes a long time. So I don't know about the time and cost effectiveness as far as, like, if someone just wants to make one for themselves or make one while they sleep, because they're going to take a long time for these things to do their thing, well, that's okay. But if I needed to make my products by 3D printing, for example, I'd have to have 15 3D printers on the go all the time just to keep the volume up. And then I'm just adding to the plastics problem in the world.
The plastic waste, yeah.
More plastic.
There's something special about handcrafted timber blocks.
Yeah,
I feel that.
Yeah,
and it kind of goes hand in hand with hand making hats.
Yeah, because the timber blocks can always be reshaped. People can send back a block and say, "Oh, look, I'd like you to do a different shape on it, recarve half of it." More done in millinery than anything. But yeah, there's a tactileness to it. There's a historical link to timber, and it is as a craft. I think it's also easier to do custom work when it's timber, because until something's made, you often can't. If it's a special shape, for example, not just say an open crown, you can't really. Someone says, "Oh, I want this hat, and I want it to be round and have this flat spot about 3/4, and then that flat spot, I want that to do a bit of a swoop and go around the back on a." And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So how do you turn that into a computer generated reality when you can grab a block of wood and you can start carving, and then you can FaceTime with the customer and say, right, here we go, and they can say, "Oh, take a bit more out of that," and you can actually do it with them right then and there, and you can carve it. So I think, and especially if it's a reproduction, it's probably easier. I mean, people who are really, really savvy with their 3D printing and their CAD design and stuff like that, yeah, maybe to them it's a no-brainer to sit down on a computer and program it and get their 3D printer or something to do it. But I can sit down in 25 seconds do a schematic for a customer and hold it up to the screen, and they go, "Oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for," without spending 3 hours on CAD CAM software or designing something. So I think there's always going to be people using new technology, and I think the beauty of what we do is it's linked to the past, and people love wooden hat blocks, and a well-treated hat block will outlast the person who's got it if they treat it well.
Yeah.
But what's your experience with the 3D printed one?
I printed a really large one, like a 65 centimeter one, just to have it quickly and because I knew I wouldn't really use it too often.
Yeah.
And it's all right. I feel like it's a plastic form, and it looks like it's been coated with epoxy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it would go if you were ironing on it every day, but it doesn't have the same feel or the same, hesitate to use the word soul, but timber really has something special about it. And I love my blocks, and I love to watch them get darker and more patina with age, with every hat that I make from them. So I think they might be a good way to start if you're just getting into hat making and you just want to try it out, see if that's the path that you want to go down. But then once you know that you want to be a hat maker, I feel like there's nothing else but timber.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree, because it can be quite expensive to start off, and for someone to start off and then say, no, I don't like this at all, and then they've just spent $2,000 on some basic kit, but that's the other good thing about the timber products. And I used to have this conversation with milliners a lot, that if you buy a really well made hat block from a reputable manufacturer that backs up their work, and you don't want it anymore, you will never have any trouble selling it. And there's not uncommon to find our blocks being sold and resold. And I think that's also one of the beauties of the timber blocks, is especially if it's come from somebody with a good name and reputation, someone else will snap it up.
Absolutely. Is there a certain size that's more popular than others?
I wouldn't say popular, I'd say more common. Millinery, it was always 57 centimetres.
Okay.
I'd say with hatting, it's probably more like 59, 60, 61. But there isn't a more popular, because especially in hat making, a lot are now tooling up for whole runs of blocks, because it's very hard to, you can make a 57, make a 56, 55 at a push, maybe a 58 or a 59 if you're stretching. But after that, what do you do if someone comes in with a 54 centimetre head or a 63 centimetre head and you've only got a 57, 58 block?
Yeah. Got to put a lot of felts over the top of it to stretch it out a bit.
Quadruple blocking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the problem there is, while you can do that with the crown, you can't do that with the flange.
That's true. Are you selling a lot of flanges at the moment, or more hat blocks?
More hat blocks, more crowns.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time when I make flanges, it's when people have ordered a hat maker's kit.
Right.
Where the kit, they get an open crown of their choosing, a flange of their choosing, a traditional flange stand, which is reproduction of vintage ones, and a spinning stand, and the basic hand tools and a rounding jack and stuff like that. We have had it's people order runs of flanges, more out of America or Canada. But yeah, most seem stuck on flat brims, and I always go, it's a bit of a shame. Someone needs to break out into something with a bit more flair to it, because your typical flange, which we call our 710, which is about a 3-inch brim with about a 2 centimeter, curl to it, sort of, so to speak, curvature to it. They came in quite a number of sizes in vintage, 2 inches, 2.5 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, to your typical derby and top hat brim, but also, ones that are about 4 inches wide. with a really nice swoopiness to them. And I did have one person order 12, I think it was 12 of those really swoopy curved ones, which was a reproduction of one of Blake's brims. And I'd say it's my favourite flange, but very few people order it. Yeah, so most people seem still stuck on these dead flat brims.
Yeah.
And I don't I really don't understand why because I have to have a rudimentary knowledge of hat making.
Mm-hmm.
And Renee is making hats now.
Oh, great.
She hasn't put any publicly. She's not ready to launch, kind of thing. But so it's interesting watching her make stuff because it's a bit of a test mule as well. But I've got to have a rudimentary knowledge of making hats because people will say, "Well, how do I use these flange brims?" Because the methodology of using them is very different in hatting than it is in millinery. So I know how they get used, and because of that, I go, this is really not rocket science. I'm like, why aren't people doing these shaped brims? From a blockmaker's perspective, from knowing just the basics of blocking and hat shaping, I'm at a bit of a loss for that. I think I think I would theorize its cost. Its cost because it's another tool that if they end up buying another dozen, and that can be $6,000 and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's cost, and I also think that it's a bit of a fad. You know, like these flat brims are pretty popular. A lot of customers want a flat brim, not too fussed about a flange. But I think as you go down the hat maker's path, you probably get bored with that, and you want to start adding a little bit more, playing with brims and different parts of the hat, you know?
Yeah, I think for people starting out, an open crown and some basic hand tools with skills gets them a really good start. And because the flat brim is popular, it becomes very easy for them to do that and have a wow factor from their hats, from how they style, and whether they burn into it, draw, stitch, whatever they do. It's I think get somebody 3 or 4 crown sizes and some hat bodies, and away they go.
Yeah, what would be your advice to someone who's just starting out or thinking about starting out in hat making? What would you suggest that they get?
I would suggest that they actually get a kit with the flange as well, and don't be afraid to use it. But some people don't want shaped brims. They want to do cowboy hats, and you can do the cowboy hat creasing of the brim simply by hand, the same as you can the crown. But no, I think if you want to set yourself up as a hatter, I think you should go the whole hog, because you want a point of difference. To me, you'd want a point of difference. So you're not just doing what everybody else is doing. But yeah, I understand that a reluctance to, probably from a financial point of view, but I would, as a hat block maker, I would say buy more hat blocks.
Get them all.
Get them all. Get one of everything.
Yeah.
That is the other interesting thing. Millinery to hat making. A milliner will say, "Oh, I want one block," whereas a hat maker will say, "I want 10 of that block." So if a milliner gets a beret block, they will get one beret block. And they will make that work for as many sizes as they can. Whereas a hat maker will come along, especially once they're up and running and getting established and have got some money to reinvest, will go, right, I want 51s, I want 10, and 52s, I want 10, and I want a run of 10 bullet domes, and I want these flanges, and I want a run of those flanges. And so there'll be multiples. Yeah. compared to millinery, which is one at a time.
Could you explain the difference between the 51 style block and the 52 style block, and then also let us know which one seems to be the most popular?
I would say they're as popular as each other. I don't think there's unless I go through my books and actually add them up over a 12-month period, I'd say they're pretty much on a par. And it comes down to personal aesthetics. But the 52, they all have a taper. The 51s and 52s, they all have a taper. The 51 has more of a dome top to it, and the center front, center back slope, when you look at it from the side of the block, it leans in more. Whereas a 50, I've got to get them right, 52 is a little bit straighter up and down the sides, but still has taper, and it's a bit flatter across the top. And the curve is, I can scribble this. There we go. That's more a 51.
Right.
Whereas a 52 would be, if I draw over that, it's a bit crude.
A bit more square.
So the 52 is a bit more square, whereas the 51 has more of a domeness to the top. And people will often say, well, which one should I get? And I'll say whichever one you like. But sometimes I will advise them, depending on what they're trying to work out, to get one of each. If they're looking at multiple blocks, get one of each. Because when you push the 51 top in, because it's got more out, you'll get more in. You'll get a deeper depression when you make a Homburg. Whereas a 52, to get a really deep crease in a Homburg style of that, you're going to push the center front and back out more. But it really comes down, I think, to personal aesthetics, what people like. So but that's the difference. It's just a slight difference in the shape.
I feel like it's a little subtle when you're first starting out. It's hard to tell the difference. And then as you kind of in it a little bit more, you start to realize those little nuances in the crown and how much it kind of rakes back. Or especially, I really like the 51 when I'm making an open crown style hat.
Yeah,
it's got that really nice dome look. But for a fedora, I really like the 52s.
Yep, and sometimes people will play with the bullet dome as well, which literally looks like a bullet. It's much more pointy. And if you were to get one of each and do exactly the same creasing on them, then you start to see the difference between the three outcomes. But if you're just looking at a photograph, it's really hard. People will send us a picture of a hat and they say, what crown do you think was used to make this? And it's, you have a bit of a guess, but you don't know.
You never really know. What about the top hat? You make puzzle blocks for those, is that right?
Yeah.
They look really interesting.
Yeah. I love making top hats, and I hate making top hats. We make them the same as the vintage ones, with the timber tongue and groove. And they've been a learning curve too, because just for millinery's not that pedantic. It's like, if they like the shape of the top hat, they go, that's great. Whereas we've had a lot of interest from Europe in making top hats that are extremely authentic in their measurements and how the block has to be to suit the old school methodology of making them. So they're not blocking these hats with felt hat bodies. They're going right back to cloth and shellac and the silk and everything. And the blocks are different design for that type of manufacture than what they are for modern manufacture. But the challenge I have with top hats and with puzzle blocks in general, but top hat it seems to show up more, is timber. I was thinking about it today. I call timber a zombie. It's dead, but it moves. I'm just going to shut my door to my office. I'm getting cold.
No worries.
Should put the heater on.
Getting cold down there.
Yeah. Oh, hang on. Yes, it's getting cold. Sorry. It's dead, but it moves. You're going to need to do a little bit of editing there, Jack.
That's all right, mate.
Yeah, I call timber a zombie because it's dead, but it moves. In that it has a certain percentage that it will shrink or expand depending on humidity. And so I can make a block, and because the top of the top hat is like dead flat, and you've got these 5 sections, depending on whether or not the days, because once it's made, it's got to go out to the varnishing area, could sit there for a few hours or a day until Renee gets into her schedule to get out there, and by the time you varnish it and you finish it, and she puts it back together, and it doesn't fit. And there's tweaking to make it fit properly again, of the tongues and the grooves, and it all gets back together. And then the top's got these little steps because the timber has shrunk or expanded depending on what the ambient temperature is. And so it's like, so she's varnished the whole block, it's ready to go out, and she brings it in, she's like, I can't get this thing to fit. Because I know when it left my bench, it was perfect. And then
so it wasn't your fault, it was her fault.
Yeah. And then I've got to re-sand the whole top because the timber has actually moved that little bit. And maybe some people wouldn't be fussed by it, but I am, so I can't deal with it. I got to fix it. So it can delay the thing going out by another 2 days.
Yeah.
But the brims I love. My favourite brim is probably doing top hat flange brims. Yeah. Love them.
Would you say, so you're obviously based in Australia, is your market mostly Australians or is it overseas as well?
It's probably 60%. Look at my books. Export. On an average, between 55 to 60% of my work is export.
Yep. And is that to the States or Europe or a little bit of a mix?
Mainly to highest percentage of export would be going to the United States, followed by Canada, followed by probably a little bit of a smattering of England and Europe, South America, because we've sent everywhere. We've got customers in Russia, and Poland, and Brazil, and in South America, Mexico, Hong Kong, China, Japan, England, France, Canada. Yeah, everywhere.
All over.
Yeah, about 60% on average is export.
Fantastic. And so with hat block making, it seems like it. Well, you were saying to me before, it's kind of a niche within a niche,
Yeah.
and yeah, it doesn't seem like there's too many out there. How do you find your place within the hat block making world?
It was a very small world at the start because I was only concerned with Australia. At that point, Dad would be like, "Oh, every now and then you might get someone from overseas," but it was all Australian focused. That was the market. We do the trade shows every year, um, which would kind of set you up for the next 6 months. You'd get a lot of orders at the trade show, and you'd come back and you'd make them and stuff like that. Slowly, you'd get more aware of other block makers, um, and that was not through searching for them, but through customers telling us, asking us to make their stuff. So you'd get an email from someone, they'd send me a picture of another hat block maker's product and say, "Can you make me this?" And then I go, "Oh, there's this block maker," and I'd learn who that was. And my answer invariably is no, by the way. I'd say, if you like that person's product that much, buy it from them, don't ask me to copy it. Unless it is what I call open market, like top hat. If someone says, "Oh, look, this block maker in XYZ countries here, I love this top hat." Well, a top hat's a top hat. Who owns a top hat copyright, so to speak? You know what I mean? Or an open crown. They've been around for so long, they're open source type of products. But if it's a unique design to somebody, and I can look at a photo of a product, and I know who made it just by looking at it, because I know their timber, I know their style, I can work out what their methodology is. So yeah, I'd become aware of them, but I didn't try to get those customers. Um, I didn't try to poach customers or anything like that. Um, but the international market really opened up in 2016 for us. We did a trip to America to a millinery convention in Tennessee, which put us before a lot of Americans in millinery. We did that again in 2018, and then COVID killed it, unfortunately. Um, but we've never advertised. Well, no, not never. We have occasionally advertised and never found it worth it, and it's always been by word of mouth. Um, so I I don't have a real explanation for why we've picked up as much international work as we have, other than um, knowing that two block makers in America closed their doors in 2015, 2016. They would have been predominantly doing millinery stuff as well, but they retired and closed shop. And I don't know if that's why, or whether or not it's just word of mouth. Um, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and I've just started playing around on TikTok, and but I presume it's word of mouth because we've never really advertised, and I hope that word of mouth is, um, that not only is it cost effective or price attractive, um, uh, or the product is seen to be of high enough quality or good quality, and but we also um, try to be as user friendly as we can, so nothing's too much trouble, and um, we give them a lifetime warranty on the product, and um, we'll back it up. So I guess that's why we've got so much of the international market. But to be perfectly honest, Jack, we could have a very small percentage of the international market. You know, what is a lot to me might not be a lot to somebody else. So,
Over the last few years, it seems like there's a lot more hat makers. Have you noticed a bit of a change or an increase in orders in the last few years?
oh, absolutely. We used to have a turnaround time of about 2 to 3 weeks for blocks. Um, During COVID, we, like everybody else, ran out of work. Um, that was a bit of a scary period. After COVID, the orders just took off, like just and we got up to 14 week wait time for me to get to an order. Um, and I put on an assistant, and we managed to pull it back to about 7. But I don't have her with me anymore, and we're currently sitting at 10 week turnaround now. So yeah, orders have definitely picked up. The hat making side of it has overtaken the millinery side of it, and the quantity of each order has increased. Whereas it's, we've had some really large orders, um, which is really cool. I really love seeing orders come in like that because it's like, oh, yes, I can survive for another month.
Yeah.
So yeah, orders have really
Pressure's off.
taken off, and we're currently sitting at 10 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I was looking at finding out about how to become a hat maker and what you needed, your name was the only one that popped up, and both you and Renee were incredibly helpful to me, and I don't think that I would have been able to start without your advice and pointing me in the right direction.
Shucks, you're too kind. It's nice. But seriously, it's not. It's nice to hear. When people say, "Oh, I got your name from XYZ," or and have a happy customer. I aim for customers for life is my philosophy, and of course they can go other places. That's not a problem. But you know, I we've got a lot of repeat customers, so that's really good.
Yeah, I'm 100% convinced that there's nowhere else that I would go. How do you feel about the future of hat block making? Obviously it's a very kind of like a dying trade, and there's still a few and maybe a couple more starting to jump in on the scene. But what about passing that information on, like within your business and your company?
That's a subject that Renee and I go round in circles on. There's no way that I can pass this on to my children because they're just not interested. They're not interested in working this hard because it is hard work. Um, so it's not going to get passed on to the third generation like Dad passed it on to me. Um, I need to pass it on. I need to pass it on at some point, because I'm wearing out. But I also need it to remain a viable proposition from an income point of view because it's not a part-time enterprise. I don't have, Renee and I are both full-time in this, and our whole livelihood and lifestyle is tied up in the success of hat blocks and how many hat blocks I can physically make in a week. And I'm 60 and wearing out, and I'm like, I want to slow down. I want to. I find now, and a lot of people do as they get older, that the most valuable commodity they realize is time, and I don't have time to do the things that I want to do anymore. So I need to work out what my exit strategy is while still generating income from it. So the wheels turn about, do we employ somebody to do some of the work? Um, do we take on somebody who actually can take over the business at some point? I think it's a real shame that the block makers in America shut down and were not able to pass it on. I can't speak as to why they didn't, or if anybody bought their equipment and has tried to carry it on, but I'm not aware that they did. So it's a real shame because um, Richard Lamode, who ran Lamode Hat Blocks in America, he had decades of experience. Um, and it's all, largely all gone. And there's not there's not enough room for too many block makers, because if there's lots and lots of black block makers, there's not enough for any of them to actually survive. It just becomes a part-time casual thing. But yeah, it's important to be able to pass it on. But yeah, that's a conversation we have quite a lot, because I can't keep going like I'm doing, and I can't slow down. And I need to bring someone in, but they also need to be somebody who's productive and not just means that I have to produce more to cover their wage. I need somebody who can come in and take over and make their wage and my wage, so to speak.
Yeah, add to the enterprise.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a tough one, because where do you find the right person for that? Because it's not just, I want somebody who wants a job. It's got to be somebody that can see a career and a passion and a legacy to take over, and a skill and something to carry on. So yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's I'd be really interested in seeing more of your process, not to not to try and copy, of course, but just to try and capture some of the beauty and the history behind it, and that you're doing something that does have a quite a history to it, and it's and you I don't think hat makers really realize how important a hat block maker is to the industry. In many ways, it's kind of like an unsung hero that's hiding in the background.
yeah, yeah. We like the. I guess we like the costume designer to the film star. Um, we're behind the scenes, because, to be honest, we're just a tool maker. Um, we make the tool that enables somebody else to make a wearable, functional piece of clothing or artwork. Um, um, yeah, I suppose if people can get some hat blocks off of, eBay and Etsy and secondhand and things like that, and go for it, yeah, it's possible that they have no real concept of what goes on behind the scenes to get that got those hat blocks out there in the first place. But the industry, I mean, if you wound the clock back 100 years, there were hat block manufacturers everywhere, and they would have walls and walls and walls of racks upon racks upon racks of hat blocks, all stacked up, raring to go. Whereas now it's very much, one at a time, whereas they had whole factories full of workers churning out dozens and dozens of hat blocks a day.
It's incredible to see. There's a couple of hatters that have a really nice collection of blocks and flanges, and I think Tat and Baird and Optimo have some really nice range of.
Yeah, I think I mentioned when we were having a chat earlier on social media, when someone's, they're showing off the hat they've made or the process, and they're doing, they're steaming or shaping or burning it or whatever. And I'm always looking at the background. I'm going, oh, what blocks have they got? And I go, man, look at that collection of blocks. Like, holy crap. Where did they get all those? Because, it's like dozens and dozens of vintage blocks and stuff. Wow. And then I look and I go, oh, that's one of my blocks. Oh, that's one of my blocks. I go, who's that block? I look at that guy. Yeah. He's got a block from XYZ,
Yeah.
Oh, I need to touch base with that person. They need one of mine.
How many hat block makers would you say there are out there, or major players?
Don't quote me on it, but I could be wrong, but I think there's probably 4 to 6 that I would say are the main professional. That's all they do. They have their web presence, their social media presence, their reputation. I'd probably say it's as few as that, and then it could be easily 2 dozen smaller ones who don't have as much presence on the internet or social media, so you don't hear about them very often, or who are only selling on sites like eBay or Etsy and stuff like that.
More like a hobbyist.
Yeah, I mean, they may not be a hobbyist. That might be enough to keep them going because, but of the big ones that everyone knows in the industry, people talk about Guy Morse Brown hat blocks. People talk about Boone and Lane. They'll talk about us. And then from there, see, even for me, there's some I go, oh, I know there's one in Poland. I'm like, oh, what's the name? I know there's one in France. I can't remember. So, there's probably only 3 or 4 that are the major ones that everybody knows about. But those smaller ones that might be only part-time or they might be full-time might have a very busy clientele because most of those are in Europe. And, we've got 27 million or something here. You think about the population of Europe, it's huge. So it's quite possible that a block maker somewhere in a small studio in France is flat out with the demands purely from the milliners in that part of Europe. And they don't need the global presence, so to speak. So the major names are few, but there's probably a good couple of dozen. Yeah.
Do you have a few milliners and hat makers whose work that you look at and you're like, they use my hats, and you really like the work that they do? They use my hat blocks, sorry.
With millinery, there was a time where I could look at the fashions on the field, photographs, for example, at the Melbourne Cup or whatever, and I go, oh, that's one of mine, that's one of mine, that's one of mine. That was very common. As millinery picked up again, then there'd be a small number of hobbyist hat block makers that would come onto the scene, and they would make shapes as well. So after a while, it was a bit hard to say, oh, was that made off my block, so to speak. But some of my shapes in those early years were extremely distinct. But unless I know the hatter and what blocks they've got, if someone's got a really nice, cowboy hat or a fedora, a wide brim something, or pork pie, I can't tell what it came off because it's probably come off of a 51 or a 52, and that could have come from anybody, or it could have come from a vintage block they got on eBay. But yeah, it's really gratifying when I see social media posts and I can see they're using one of my blocks or my rounding jack or something there. It's like, hey, Yeah, I'm a real block maker. Yeah.
Yeah, and how about you tell us a little bit about the rounding jack, because I think that you've done a few different versions of it. Is that something that's been a bit of a work in progress?
It has been. It's probably onto its fourth iteration, and it's now I'm pretty much on the iteration that I think it will stay at. Um, we had a change of cutting tool that turned out to be problematic in that if they got the blade set up just right, it was great. But if they got it slightly off, it would produce a bad cut, which was a complete no-no. And I thought it's no good trying to explain to somebody how to get that blade perfectly in position. They shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to whack a blade in it and go for it. So, all right, we got to redesign this. So we redesigned that. And to be honest, the last lot of challenges have been more in. We've had the occasional one where when they've been working, as they've gone around, the slide has, because the center would slide out, the locking mechanism wouldn't hold it and it would slide out. And again, it's like, right, got another challenge there. How do we fix that? So and I've upgraded the materials in them. So all of the fittings in them now, it's all brass. They've got the brass plate on it, and all the threads and wing nuts and washers are all brass. Nice dark red, finally settled on my favourite timber for them. So I think it's pretty much in its last iteration. We've sorted out, and it's become very rare when there has been a problem. And the last one we had one where the slide and as soon as the customer, I think the customer was in Canada, as soon as she said, I've got a problem, it's not holding and it's sliding while I'm trying to cut, we just went, right, okay, we will get another one made up and shipped out as soon as possible. In the meantime, try this to fix your rounding jack so it becomes usable. And we just sent it off. And we said, when you get this one in the mail, send us the other one back. And because I want to look at it and go, why is this not functioning? Why did this fail? I think I know why it failed, but that's how we've worked with all of the blocks, Jack. Any of them, people say, oh, I don't like this feature. Okay, well, let's change it. Or this has happened, or the tip of this broke. So, okay, well, we got to change that. We had a couple of, the boomerangs, the puller downers. We had two of them snap. And we're like, right, why did they snap? Timber choice, all that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of engineering that goes into block making and tool making.
Timber choice, maybe not enough steam on a big Western felt, Western weight felt, yeah.
But, if someone says it broke, I'm like, okay, I'll send you another one out straight away. And then we go, right, what do we need to change?
Yeah, I think you guys have pretty amazing customer service. I think Renee probably deserves a bit of a shout out too. She's always ready to answer any questions and be really helpful.
Yeah. She's learnt really, really well. And I couldn't do it without her. Look, to be honest, Jack, I was doing 80 hours a week 5 years ago, and it was killing me. And I was literally spending 40 hours of the week carving hat blocks, and the other 40 hours was spent on office work, admin, emails, phone calls, packing, varnishing, running around. And Renee gave up her career as an artist. She had her own income from doing artwork, and she gave that up and came out in the dusty environment into the office and getting covered in varnish and shit like that. So
sawdust.
Yeah, I couldn't do it without her now. absolutely couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you guys are a great team. So, what about some tips or anything for some new hat makers? Like, what would you recommend? What do they need to do? What about maybe picking their first hat block in the right size?
My first thing would say cheap costs you double. Um, Plenty of milliners and hat makers have bought the cheapest block they could find to find that it was not fit for purpose. And they have to buy it again, and then so obviously it's cost them twice. Um, Look for a company that's going to back its product up with its customer service. Doesn't blame the customer. So I mean, sometimes the customer is wrong, but there's a bit of truth in saying the customer is always right, because you want to come to a company for hat blocks that is going to listen to your problem or your challenge and help you understand how to either change your technique or redesign the block. And someone that backs up their product, which is why we do the lifetime guarantee, because we want people to know that if there's any problem, they're going to get looked after. Um, what was the other part of the question, Jack?
I was just going to get you to talk a little bit about if you're purchasing your first hat block, and most people would probably buy one in their size, but is there anything special that they need to know to be able to make a hat in their size?
Yes. If get a block that's one size bigger. Quite often, we have to ask people, what are you trying to make? Because it turns out that the blocks that they're ordering are not going to make the hat that they think it's going to make. So I suppose the advice on that point of view would be, don't just take what's on catalogue, but because it might not be right, because you're just looking at a photograph on a website, and some people have a great ability to visualize the finished hat, and some people have less ability to do that, and they need more help in understanding what it's going to do. But it helps to know what you want to make, because we're probably going to say, send us some pictures of the types of things that you think you want to make. And then they'll send 3 pictures of hats, and they'll be like, well, they actually require 3 completely different blocks. One block will not make all those 3. They're so radically different. But yeah, be prepared to spend a bit of money. Anything worth doing right is, worth the money in the outlay, and do it properly. But yeah, if you want a 56 hat, get a 57 block. Millinery doesn't seem to apply as much, because they use Petersham and it's a lot thinner, and millinery will stretch the hats a lot more to get the fit, and they're softer and stuff like that. But yeah, it's probably the biggest thing.
And if there's any hat makers out there or new wannabe hat makers, where can they find your work and maybe invest in a nice set of hat blocks?
If you hit Google with Hat Blocks Australia, you'll probably find we come up pretty much right up the top on the first page. We're also Hat Blocks Australia on Facebook and on Instagram, and now on TikTok as well. We changed our name to Hat Blocks Australia a few years ago from Blocks by Design, because I thought Blocks by Design doesn't say anything. It doesn't tell anybody what it is and where we are. So we changed it to Hat Blocks Australia, and then everybody knew exactly what it was and where we are. So that's the easiest way to find us. Hat Blocks Australia, hit it on Google, you'll go straight to the website. There's 2 sides of the website. There's Hatmaker's portal, and then there's the millinery portal. There's a bit of a crossover, but there's an inquiry form on there, or hit us up at hatblocksaustralia@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to find us. Yeah.
Sounds good. And you ship all over the world?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Very seldom do we have trouble. There's a couple of countries where customs seem to be a bit of a challenge. We had a challenge with Brazil recently where they didn't like the description on the customs deck and they sent it back. And all it said was making tools. And it's like, insufficient description. I'm like, well, what do you call it? So we actually we made a whole new set of hat making tools, sent them to the customer and said, listen, we're going to update the description. We're going to give it as good a shot as we can, but fingers crossed that it gets through. And it looks like they got through this time. So the other lot are on the way back by return mail because customs didn't like it. It looks like the set lot got through. So
it's the way that it goes sometimes.
Yeah. Somebody in Brazil must have just had a bad day and went, nah, computer says no.
Any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share before we wrap this up?
Only that I'm really thankful for where Hatblocks has taken my life. I don't think I ever realised it was as hard as it is physically and mentally. You really have to think. You are designing and engineering and getting inside people's heads and working out what they want. It's become all-consuming. Like my other hobbies and passions, which were sculpting and painting, have fallen by the wayside because I just don't have the. By the time I've spent a whole day being creative with hat blocks, to then finish work and be creative, it's like not going to happen. But I'm really thankful for it because it's enabled Renee and I to get to the point when we're both self-employed, working from home on our property. We've just built a new house. Although the budget got way out of control and interest rates are crushing, that it's hat blocks that have done that. Something that I would never have contemplated, and to have the support from milliners and hat makers that come back year after year for the last 10 years, I am so thankful for. It's been an absolute blessing. It's it has its moments like all types of work, but it's been very, 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 very good to us for our ability to fund our life and help other people fund their life. To see people that have bought a small selection of the products that my hands have made, and then to see them launching their enterprise on social media and hear their success in selling hats that they've made on our tools, I think that's friggin' marvelous. Really do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely marvelous to see. I love seeing people succeed at entrepreneurship, and I love talking about it. And I'll quite often talk with milliners and hat makers privately on the phone about how to run the business to make it profitable and what they need to do, because I want them to succeed. I mean, their success is my success, but without a hat block maker, it gets very hard to make hat blocks. So it's very much reciprocal, but I'm very, very grateful and appreciative to milliners and hat makers for everything that it's enabled. It's a pivotal thing in my life. I've got one friend who is pivotal in every aspect of my life for the last 30 years. Every good thing in my life has come from this one man who gave me a chance 30 years ago.
Wow.
Including the hat blocks, because I went to him and said, to my mate, I said, listen, I want to know if you will loan me $10,000 because I want to go and buy a whole big bunch of machinery to start this new business. And he said, yep, no worries. We did it, proper signed, proper agreement. But without him, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing because there's no way I could have found the money. And so hat blocks has been as pivotal in my life as that friendship. And that's why I want it to continue. That's why I want to work less, and I want somebody else in the future to come in and take a lion's share of the workload. But I don't ever want to part company with it because creating things is part of who I am. It's a tool, but it's still sculpture. And it's that sense of satisfaction that I have made this product, this three-dimensional object that's got my brand on the bottom and is going somewhere. And if that's looked after, that will still be here 100 years after I'm gone.
Yeah. Well, mate, I'm very grateful for you and what you've done for the hat making industry and what you've done for my life. 99% of my hats have been made on your blocks, probably more, 99.9%. And and without you, I wouldn't have got my start either. So I'm very grateful to you.
That's really nice to hear.
Well, mate, thank you for joining us on the show and for sharing a little bit about you and what you do. And definitely would love to have you back on sometime and delve a bit deeper into the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I can jibber jabber for a long time. There's a lot of nuanced things about block making that I've learned over the years, and I've only learnt them by my customers talking about them and saying, listen, I'm buying this machine from Germany, and this is the requirements and specifications of the exactness of the oval, and here's a whole bunch of schematics. And I'm like, I never even knew such things existed. I'm sure in Europe maybe they did, but here in Australia, our hat making industry and all its history disappeared. So to be learning that stuff now, and I'm like, wow, this is crazy stuff. This is so precise. This isn't just getting a block of wood and just whacking it out and saying that looks good enough. Someone will whack a hat off that. There's a whole science and method. There's a whole science and mathematics just to the type of oval. It's crazy. But yeah, love to come on again.
Well, yeah, that would be great, mate. So thanks again. If people are looking to find your stuff, they can check you out at Hatblocks Australia.
Yep.
And send our regards to Renee too, please, mate.
I will. All right.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right, mate. Thanks a lot.
Right. Bye.
All right. Thanks for listening in to this week's episode of the Hatmakers podcast. If you want to find out more about Darryll's work, check out his website, hatblocksaustralia.com.au, or follow him over on Instagram at hatblocksaustralia. My name is Jack, and I'm a hat maker at Creatures of the Wild Unknown, so you can check out my work there. If you want to keep up to date with new episodes, follow us at the Hatmakers podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you can find and follow us over on Instagram as well. We've got more episodes lined up for you guys real soon, so until then, keep on hatting.